Hi, I'm Bonnie. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a bag that I was a test sewist for and I had a really great time. This is the Miss Practicality bag by Bella V. So this is not a sew along video, it's just tips. So you do need to have the pattern to know exactly where I'm referring and what I'm talking about. Now, one of the things that I saw happen to someone that I did not cover in my tips was this. So I'm going to give you this tip now. When you put the lining in to the exterior, if you can see here, there are two seams. So that occurs on both sides. So there's 4 places where there's potential to not match up your seam allowances correctly. So you have the exterior seam allowance here, and it should be aligned with this seam allowance. If for whatever reason you shift this over and you match that seam allowance, you can see what's going to happen. Your lining is going to be baggy here, you're going to lose this pleat, and you're going to have done the top stitching, and that would be a shame to make that mistake. When it finishes, you should have a rivet in front of the pocket, in the middle, and behind these pockets. Okay, and that's how it's going to line up with the rivet holes on the exterior. So again, when you're putting in the lining, make sure you line up the correct seam allowance from the exterior with the correct seam allowance with the interior or the lining. If you have any questions or need some clarification about things that I talk about, feel free to comment below, but I hope you enjoy the video.
All right, so the next tip for the Miss Practicality bag by Bella V Bags is the exterior side pieces that you have. You're going to be pre-making the holes for your rivets. So I'm just going to quickly, here's the pattern. I would set it on there. Make sure I clip in at least 2 pieces because I don't want that piece of paper to shift, but I still want to be easily accessed to get in there. And then I just lay the piece of paper on and I punch my holes. I use these type and I punch the holes directly through the paper that has the exact placement of this into my exterior fabric. Okay, next tip is on the final step for the interior lining, where you add this this base main lining piece. Prior to that, these side pieces are already done, and then you're ready to add this piece on. So one, I highly recommend that you trace a 1/4 inch line on to your fabric for the lining, so that you make sure that you're spot on when you do your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Second, this is a really good time to use double-sided tape. If you choose not to use double-sided tape, I would recommend doing some quick hand basting if possible. It just makes it open under your machine when you're sewing without 100 clips, pins, etc. And the more clips that you have on there and the more fiddling you do, the more likely that the 2 pieces are going to shift and you're going to be sewing like this. So what I did, I like to keep things as flat as possible for the longest period of time. So if you're working through this pattern, this is the Bella V pattern Miss Practicality. If you're working through this pattern, then you will understand the step that I'm referring to. So you sew, what I did was I sewed the very bottom, and she'll tell you exactly in the pattern some more ideas on sewing that. So I just sewed the bottom piece on one side, and then I sewed just this bottom seam on the other side. That allowed this piece to be flat while attaching both of these pieces, because you have a bunch of things going on as opposed to coming down, bending it here and here. So oftentimes when I'm doing linings and I get to a point that's crucial or really tricky, I will insert and sew the lining seams in pieces. I'll go for those areas that have the least resistance, and then I'll come back in and do curves, etc., whatever. I find, particularly when working with waterproof canvas, it does like to push apart from each other when it's not secured. So really securing it with, I used 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape right on the edge, and I also added 2 or 3 clips, so it wasn't too many clips, but I didn't need the clips in the corners. So that's my tip. Sew the bottom section first on both sides so that this piece is flat for both tricky bottom seams, and then I came back and it went, and I just sewed this straight, and then I just sewed that straight, and I didn't have to do any pivoting, and I was able to really stay straight on to my pre-marked 1/4 inch seam allowances. One of the options for this bag is to use some piping on the flap. If you don't have piping, or if you feel uncomfortable, maybe you feel like your skills are not up to doing a piping, you can do, it's not a fake piping, it's just a very tiny flap. So I have this vinyl, and I just cut it twice as wide as I wanted, and then I put a spray adhesive, a permanent spray adhesive on it, and folded it in half. So I know that this vinyl is going to work well because it's very soft, very flexible, and stretchy. Even though I folded it over and glued it, it's still stretchy. I'm going to be using this, and I'm going to be attaching it just like I would piping. And then there will be a little bit, it's not going to have the rounded dimension of a piping, but it is going to add a little contrast. And I really just want a subtle contrast with this gray cork. Okay, here's another alternative option for these are the strap tabs and cross tabs. So in the pattern, it calls for edge coat, so it would be a single layer of vinyl or leather, and then you would put edge coat to seal the edges. I don't have any, and if you don't have any and you want a finished edge, you can work around that. So you want to cut your strip twice as wide and twice as long. Do not add anything for a seam allowance unless you're doing fabric, but we're just going to butt the edges up. If you can see that right there, we're just butting the edges up really tight. So what I did was I used spray adhesive on the back side, folded both side edges to the center, and press that into place, and then I used a piece of double-sided tape in here and folded it together, tightly butting it here, and then I top stitched it. Be careful if you use this method because you're going to have 4 layers instead of 1. Again, this vinyl is very thin, so I knew that it was okay to go ahead and do 4 layers. The only time you're going to sew it is now. After this, it'll be riveted, So that's another way to get a finished edge without using any edge coat. And if you're using this technique to sew this, do not start at the end or on some short little piece. Go ahead and start about an inch, maybe an inch and a half down before you go down and around, and then you're going to overlap. And that way you won't have a hard time starting. You'll have a smoother start in this tiny little piece if you start in about an inch, inch and a half. And here on the longer straps, these are the strap tabs. You don't have to meet it in the middle because of the way they're inserted. Just fold them in half. Leave that raw edge that's going to be hidden, and then your exposed seams are all folded and that way. So do pay attention to the post length of your rivets. If you choose to do this technique and your piece here gets really, really thick, you're going to have to increase the length of your post for each of the rivets. Okay, here I am working on the exterior, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. Because this is 4 layers, I decided that it was not necessary to have that thick interfacing that I had created earlier on the inside. So that's your choice. Just, you know, as you go through your projects and you change things up, other things might need to be changed too. So I thought 8 layers here and 8 layers on the back was more than enough to reinforce it, and so I decided not to put the interfacing here. But I also wanted to show, I mentioned earlier about working on projects for as long as possible in the flat position. So these are the 2 side flaps, and instead of attaching one completely, what I did was, now here's my double-sided tape. Again, this is really so helpful in making this as pain-free as possible, not fiddly, and making sure everything aligns. So I have double-sided tape under here, and I stitched as directed in the pattern, but then I came to this side and stitched on this side as well. So I know that both my pieces are centered and in place, and they won't slip out of alignment at that point from the get-go, because my work is flat. And then now I'll work on to the next step, and I'll start to create the 3-dimensional effect of the purse, and it should go much easier and without fiddling, because I've got everything lined up and ready to go. So here is the inside of where this closure is. As I mentioned before, this closure is pretty substantial as far as size and weight, so I made sure I had a pretty substantial interfacing piece here on the inside. You can see I was generous as far as around. It has an underlayment foam and a fairly strong and rigid vinyl. I'm going to go ahead and cover this up with a piece of tape just to smooth out any rough edges so that doesn't wear and rub on my interior, and then it should be all good to go. All right, so here is the flap for the purse, and I wanted to show the piece of interfacing that I'm going to be sliding in there. And so this is where my lock portion is going to go. And because of the type of lock and because it's larger and heavier, I really felt like it needed some sturdy interfacing. So I like when the flap, the whole flap section is nice and solid when you grab it to do a flip lock. So I have this piece of the vinyl flooring. It's been cut. It will fit snugly. It fits right down in there. And then what will hold it in place is the piece of the hardware that sits over it, and it fits snugly. And that should help hold the shape of this front portion of the flap over time as the purse gets used.
Okay, so here's the lock. It is in place. The bag is not completed, but it's always a good idea with flip locks that you constantly check and verify that things are centered and that they fit in together, and you do this as many times as necessary to make sure that this is going to go on the bag properly. So the interfacing is in there, and it is all the way up to there, so it's just snug in, and it goes all the way across here, so it's nice and rigid in there, and it's going to help to keep this really nice and smooth and clean looking with that very sturdy vinyl flooring that I used for the interfacing.
All right, so I am getting ready to do the exterior to lining assembly, and I'm not sure if you can see, but I have taken the exterior and pushed up the bottom up into it so that it's half as deep, and I'm hoping that this will fit into this piece a little easier. This is my reinforcement on the bottom, so but this is the bottom piece. So if you can see, I have just tucked up the bottom of the exterior up inside, so it's halfway, and I still have a good inch here exposed. All right, so I'm going to attempt to make this as easy as possible for myself. This, if you recall, has a pretty sturdy interfacing in here, and according to the pattern instructions, it says a tip is to slide this flat portion in between. So I know this is the back, it has my label, in between the back and this one pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in first, if you can see. So that is in between there, and then I'm going to reach under, because this is a floating pocket. I'm going to reach under and grab that top edge of my outer flap, and I'm pulling it down into the bag so that these two will line up. And I've got double-sided tape here on the edge of the lining of my flap, and that will stick there and help me to keep that in place while I sew. And if you look inside, you can see the flap goes down behind and comes here, and because I have made this half depth, it should be able to flip in there and not be as bulky. That's my hope. I'll let you know on the other end, but I'm going to go ahead and get started and get this stitched up right here. Alright, so I have sewn that seam as instructed in the pattern, and this is kind of how it looks like when I was done. So my exterior was, because it was kind of smashed up in there, it really wasn't wedged down in, so it's already half done to pull out. So remember, this was folded down inside of the thing. So now I'm just going to pull. It's just, I don't even have to pull it out. Basically, I'm just popping this back out as it should. And then this will, see here, put that there. And then I'm going to pull the flap out, and then this interior is just going to fold down inside of my exterior. I'm going to continue to make sure my corners are pushed out nicely while I can get my hands into the bag easily. And then as you can see, this is just going to flip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab both of these pockets and open this up and then just tuck it down inside there. And that went in there really easily, really easily. There was no fighting on that, so that was nice. And then it's ready to go for the next step. The first stitching, when it was inside out, right sides together, went from the center of one side across the back and to the center of this side. I flipped it out, and now the portion that is unstitched comes from the center of one side, goes across the front, and ends at the center of the other side. So there's actually 3 layers of double-sided tape in here. Follow the directions, you'll see. And then I'm holding it in place because whether it's because I have cheap double-sided tape or if it's because the nature of these products. So the cork, this particular cork has a fuzzy black backing, which the double-sided tape didn't firmly adhere to, so I'm just giving it extra help with these clips. And then when I got to this corner piece here, I wasn't able to slip in an extra piece of double-sided tape, but it was crucial that this be on point right here because I've got 2 seams lining up. So I just stuck in some crazy glue type glue and put it in there with a couple drops, and I'm pressing it into place, and that should be fine. And the tip, I've had this open and been using it for a few months now. The tip hasn't dried up and it's still usable, and like I said, I can get down in there before I squeeze the application, and then I can get a really precise drop of glue wherever I need it. So different types of glues for different applications. Okay, I'm back on my final piece, and I apologize if you've been watching this video and some of them are sideways and some of them are straight up. I get confused sometimes between recording from an iPad to my phone, so my apologies if you can't see all of it. But if you are following along with the pattern, you should get an idea of what I'm talking about. So second time around, I'm going to talk about this bag. I'm 95% done with it, and I'm very pleased. The only thing left to do is the straps. So because everything is very toned down, all of this extra detailing that you do here shows up. If you do a print or you do a black on black or a tone on tone, all of this work is going to be lost. And I think this detail here is a key component to the design of this bag. So, and you spend a fair bit of time creating all of this. So it would be a shame to lose that. But that's what makes this bag really stand out and be special from other bags. So do consider that when you're making your color choices. This rivet is larger than the rest. It's not a mistake. I had to go with a longer rivet post in order to get this in there because it was so thick because of the way I chose to do these straps. There is an optional zipper with a placket around it for more interest. I chose not to do this on this one. Adding the rivets onto the bottom, I do add a little bit of design element to this bag because again it's so plain. On the inside, I lined it with waterproof canvas and a lining cork. This cork is for lining only. It's very thin. It is not as durable as this cork. so it is not appropriate for the exterior of a bag. However, it is perfect for lining, adds nice contrast, and it feels good. I like it in this bag. And I do like that I have some contrast on the interior of the bag, because when I look down inside visually, it helps to create 3 dimension to the bag, and I can see exactly where the top is for the card slots and where exactly this is, for me to visually look down in there and see. I chose to line the pockets. There was an option to not line. I lined it with a very lightweight quilting cotton. The pattern does have the zippers both on one side. At some point I made a boo-boo, and when it was all said and done, this is what I got. But I can easily work with that. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. Something that occurred to me after I finished the bag is that this is ideal bag purse for somebody who travels a lot between 2 different foreign countries. You can have one, because it's almost like 2 separate wallet sections here. So you could have one section of the currency and cards that you need and information you need all tucked in here for one country, and then you can keep your home country's currency, cards, and etc. in this wallet section at all times. So you would keep it all together. It would be easy. Like I said, if you travel back and forth frequently between 2 different countries for work or what have you, this purse would be ideal for keeping that all organized. So there's a space back here, this section, a slightly wider space here, a section, and then a section here. So it's a deep bag, but it is definitely not one of those purses where you drop everything in there and go. I do like that the strap is going to be narrow and not a wider strap. So this is a crossbody bag, but the straps are going to be narrow, and I think that'll be a nice design contrast on this bag to have a narrow strap. It is pretty important that you be on point with your stitching, and if you do all that and you follow the instructions, slowly but surely you will come out with a gorgeous purse.